Welcome back to Beyond 60/40. Today, I'm pleased to welcome iCapital Managing Partner, member of the Operating Committee, and Chief Client Success Officer, Eileen Duff, to the show. Eileen oversees the investor relations, enterprise integration, and client operations teams who optimize the end-to-end client experience. Eileen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to see you, and I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today because you were sort of here from the beginning. You were employee number 37 when you joined iCapital in 2016, and you were actually the firm's first institutional client. So lots to talk about. And prior to your current role, which I want to delve into in just a minute, you were also the head of fund management and research, and of course distribution prior to that. But let's talk about client success. You became the Chief Client Success Officer, I think 2 years ago. What is client success? Help us understand that.
Thanks for asking. It was really an opportunity for iCapital to bring together a new vertical that would put all of the client service teams, if you will, anyone that was touching the life cycle of an investment, together in one team so that we could ensure that what those teams were doing across that life cycle was consistent, and thereby giving our clients a consistent experience. I think that was really important for us to recognize as a firm. As we scaled and we grew, we had all these disparate teams doing disparate things across the organization. And if you want to ensure that your clients are having a best-in-class, experience, you need to ensure that everybody that's approaching that client is doing so through a consistent manner and with consistent processes.
Right, and that makes sense. And it is a long life cycle, first of all, of the alternative investment, from actually putting in the order to managing the investment and the distributions and the capital calls. So there's multiple steps that are involved in it. So I understand the need to streamline that. But now that you've been in the role for 2 years, and and you work with your teams, what are 1 or 2 or 3 priorities that you really focused on to delivering that client success?
Yeah, thank you. And I would say in the early days, it was just about bringing the teams together and understanding what everyone was doing and how they were doing it. And now that we've had an opportunity to do that, what we're focused on is first and foremost using automation and workflows to really scale what these teams are doing across all of their manual processes. Of course, we had to understand what they were doing before we could do that, but that's a huge area of focus. Data and data governance, is another big area of focus. We need to do that in order to ensure a best-in-class client service experience. And then lastly, we're really focused on communication, reporting. How are we reaching out to our clients? What are they receiving from iCapital? And how do we ensure we do that in the most efficient manner?
Sure. Those are great priorities. And let's pick up a little bit on automation, because of course our colleague Adrian Sabiniak was here just a few weeks ago talking about artificial intelligence, talking about machine learning, and the ability for those tools to be infused into various parts of the alternatives work stream. So how have you been able to perhaps leverage some of those tools and automate what historically has been a very manual business?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the areas that I'm most excited about is working with Adrian's team, particularly around, you all spent some time talking about ChatGPT as an example. And I know for one, if I'm using a website for anything and I see the ChatGPT there, I'm inclined to use it versus pick up the phone and call a service and support desk. So at iCapital, we're really looking at how do we apply that to the subscription document process. We have a whole team in investor relations that spends their day answering questions from advisors and assistants that may get stuck on a particular question. Maybe they're subscribing on behalf of an entity. That can be, a very confusing and arduous process depending on what type of entity it is. So employing ChatGPT to help them through that process is something that we're looking to implement, and I think will go a long way toward the client experience. As well, we talk about communication and how we communicate with our clients. So using machine learning to craft communications based on what it is we need to communicate and pre-populating that communication for us to send is another area where we think, the tools that Adrian's team are building can have a huge impact on what my teams are doing.
Right. Well, that's fantastic, because clearly ChatGPT can be a shortcut to productivity in our personal life as we try to plan a trip or look, do schools research or what have you. But clearly there's applications far beyond that, and including in some of these professional processes as well. But, speaking of automation, and there's one challenge I was always curious if it can be solved with better data, better automation, which is the lag between when the fund, for example, reports performance to when I get that, when the quarter closes or the month closes to when I get that performance as an investor? Because that lag time can be pretty long in private markets. Is there any way to break that logjam?
Yes, and I would say, while iCapital has spent, our 10-year history trying to break down all the barriers to entry related to alternatives, we know that reporting and the lag around reporting is one of the big pain points that we've been trying to address. And it's interesting, when you look at the process of actually getting a report out, there are lots of ways to automate it. So as an example, an NAV for a fund needs to get cut, right? We need to know how the fund performs. Then you need financial accountants to actually review that and approve that. The way in which we ingest that data, the tools that we give the team to actually review and approve that data, we can infuse those things in order to make that whole process more efficient and more timely, which then leads to better downstream reporting and enabling us to get those reports out the door more quickly. So as an example, a traditional hedge fund closes on a monthly basis, and yet historically you don't see your returns maybe 45, 60 days later. We're infusing automation and infusing tools for the team to do what they need to do so that we can get that down to less than 30 days or 15 days as an example.
I think that would be a game changer for the industry, because there's a lot of clients, a lot of investors that don't like to see that lagged performance. And it's very difficult to compare how your private assets are doing versus your public assets. But if we could shrink that, and especially under 15 days, that would be a fantastic accomplishment. So that's great to know that, automation and better data tools can be used for that. And taking a step back, Eileen, I want to go back to, as you think about your career in alternatives, and you spend most of your career in alternatives, there's been a lot of evolution, and specifically in product. And I know that back in 2016, maybe 2017, when you were thinking about what alternative investments need next, you thought of registered funds. And so what made you think about it then, and what's the state of the market today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when I first got to iCapital, I was focused on distribution and really spending a lot of my time on the road and with advisors. And what became apparent to me that was, we had great private funds, terrific private equity funds, terrific hedge funds.
Yeah.
But for most advisors, those funds are only available to a subset of their clients. Traditionally, they could only show those funds to clients that have 5 million or more in investable assets. And it's a lot for an advisor to have to dig in and learn about an illiquid 12-year life private equity fund, particularly if they're only going to be able to sell it to a subset of their client base. And so really, through listening to them and learning about their process and how they think about building client portfolios, it became very apparent that we needed to find a way to support more products that would be available to a broader array of their client base, which was at the same time that more registered products, non-traded REITs and BDCs were becoming more apparent in the US market.
Right. So that's the U.S. market. And obviously, that's been highly successful, the growth of the registered fund market in the U.S. But at iCapital, we're also focused on delivering access to alternatives globally. And so when we go across the pond, when we think about Europe in particular, I find that there's definitely a sense of, yes, a lot of clients want to adopt alternatives, but what types of structures do you think might be coming to Europe that will be the same kind of game changers they have been in the U.S.?
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because previously we saw UCITS in Europe. That was a big trend years ago. And, whether or not that really took off, anyone could debate, but I would probably argue that it didn't take off to the level that people expected. iCapital has launched a number of Luxembourg vehicles to support our European clients. We, of course, have a very large slate of Cayman funds to support our offshore clients. But I think what's most interesting now is a new regulation. It's actually the second iteration of a regulation that was released called LTIFs, which is effectively allowing traditional alternative asset managers to launch vehicles to a broader array of more retail clients. So taking those investments and wrapping them in a structure that removes some of the barriers to entry that are associated with more traditional 3C7 products.
Right, and that certainly would move the needle on greater adoption of alternatives.
I personally think it's going to be a trend similar to what we've seen here in the US, where we know the growth of these products has been extraordinary, and I think that trend, will continue for years to come.
Right. Well, speaking of predictions and speaking of things that you're focused on what's next, what do you think beyond this is next in terms of new products that need to be available to more financial advisors here or globally?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're most excited about here is the ability to give advisors the opportunity to build portfolios. At the end of the day, that's what advisors are doing all day long, right? They're building portfolios using different investment instruments. But can we make it so that they can build portfolios of alternatives in an easy one-stop solution? That's kind of where I see the market going. Whether it's registered funds or more traditional funds, making it easy and more efficient for them by allowing them to put those model portfolios together and purchasing them through one single subscription document or one single ticket. While that may not be available from the perspective of, you're typing a ticker into the screen, giving them the technology so that the process of filling out the subscription document, getting it signed by the client is happening in one fell swoop versus 2 or 3 is really where I think the market is going and what we're so excited about here at iCapital.
Right. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion, Eileen, and thank you very much for your insights. And thank you for the work you're doing both in data governance and automation and also client communications to really make sure that our clients do have the most successful outcomes that they can in alternatives. So we wish you and the entire client success team continued success.
Thanks so much, Anastasia.
Thanks so much, Eileen.